Don't stop.
Hi, thanks for joining me on the Everything and Anything in a Big Gay podcast. Sorry if you hear my cat meowing. As soon as I started to do this intro for this podcast, my cat decided it needed attention. And he is downstairs on the second floor, meowing so loud you would think that he is in the room with me. So if you hear him, I apologize. Anyway, I have been thinking a lot about this podcast and just how I believe everything we do is meant to happen. So I've always believed that that our life has a way of kind of shoving us toward a certain path, where we're meant to walk. And it even feels like at times there could be a cliff that comes, and should you jump off and see what happens, or do you go the safe way? And my path has brought me to this podcast, where I started off as doing this as something as a hobby and doing it as fun. And now it's turned into something that it's like a real business for me. So my guest today is Peter Moore, and he's kind of living proof of walking down a path, because when the publishing industry crumbled around him, he didn't cling to the past. He reinvented himself, which I love. And not just any reinvention. He went from editing some of the biggest magazines in the world to becoming a witty, insightful cartoonist and commentator, blending humor, art, and storytelling in a way that is uniquely his own. I really enjoyed talking to him. I think he has a great personality. I thought he was a great guest, and I hope you enjoyed his interview as well. So thanks so much for listening, and enjoy my interview with Peter Moore. Hi, thanks for joining me on the Everything and Anything in a Bit Gay podcast. My guest today is Peter Moore. He was once a top editor at Men's Health, Playboy, and Backpacker, and now he is a sharp-witted cartoonist and commentator for the Colorado Sun. He also posts drawings and commentary at petermoore.substack.com. Basically, when the media world collapsed around him, he didn't panic, he pivoted. He reinvented himself with creativity and purpose. His story is all about tuning out the noise and truly listening to yourself, which I think all of us could probably learn from and do. Welcome to the show.
Oh, it's so good to be here. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I'm so excited to talk with you. So tell me how you did this fascinating pivot from being an editor or top person at these magazines, these big magazines, and then you went to a cartoonist to a commentator. How did that all happen, and how did you shift gears?
Yeah, well, there's nothing like having zero other choice to motivate you. Honestly, I'd worked for decades in the magazine and book industries in some pretty top flight organizations, very big magazines, very big selling books. But when the pandemic hit, all of publishing had a real crisis there of who their audiences were going to be, what the best media were going forward for actually reaching people, what people were using. And, so my freelance and professional life went from 90 miles an hour to zero over the course of the pandemic, when a magazine I'd been hired to launch folded. And I had to ask myself what was going to be next for me professionally. And the key moment in there, I was complaining with a bunch of my publishing industry friends, and a few of them took me up on something that I'd been talking about doing for a long time, which was working on a memoir. Mm-hmm. There was nothing else happening, so I couldn't very well say, no, I'm too busy for that. I wasn't too busy for anything except for breathing. So I started on this memoir, but the turning point for me came when I thought that the manuscript could be better if I would insert some drawings into it. Like when I was a little kid, I was a fan of Dickens novels, with the illustrations that were in Dickens novels of the, ridiculous characters doing ridiculous things. And, writing my own memoir, I realized I was a ridiculous character doing ridiculous things, and I could amplify that and comment on it by putting drawings in it. And I'd always been interested in art, but hadn't really pursued it in any way professionally. But once I got going on this memoir with illustrations, I realized that I could serve as kind of my own doppelganger. I was not only writing my story, but I could also comment on my story at the same time by adding drawings to it. And it was really a game changer for me because I've always operated in the publishing industry. I have literary skills, writing skills, but I didn't realize the degree to which that all could be amplified and strengthened if I would add my drawings to them. And, once I started going on that, then the opportunities start popping up. I pitched the Colorado Sun, which is a 2 million page view a year publication on wouldn't it be fun if I made fun of Colorado and Coloradans in a cartoon commentary form. And they loved that idea. And I immediately immediately established myself as a cartoonist with a major publication. And then Colorado NPR saw what I was doing in the Sun, and they said, we'd love for you to do a version of that with animations for us for NPR. So, at that point in my career as a cartoonist, I had no idea how to do animations, but I nodded my head vigorously and figured, there are enough YouTube videos out there to help me figure it out, which I did.
Yeah.
So suddenly I went from being the editor who was like bossing other people around to being a creator in my own right. And I realized that I've been denying myself, the most fun I could have, which was to combine writing and drawing and humor in what I do. And, it has been a tremendous leap forward for me in my satisfaction. My salary hasn't caught up with where it was, but, at a certain point in your life, you just have to say, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to invest in myself right now and see where it takes me. And I don't know the answer to that yet, but I can tell you I'm having a lot of fun along the way.
Is there anything you miss about kind of the old school magazine world, though, or are you a much happier person doing what you're doing now?
The magazine industry was exactly what I needed for a certain time in my life. I was the breadwinner of a family of four. My sons, were unfortunately super intelligent, so they got into really good schools, which were also really expensive schools. So that's when I was able to pile my. I launched a career as a ghostwriter that went on at the same time as my career as a magazine editor. So I was earning, book fees in addition to a salary at that time, which is exactly what I needed to write those tuition checks and to, pay for our house in the suburbs. But, as kids do, they grow up and they went away around the same time that my career went away at the same time. But my expenditures didn't have to be as high. It was a time in my life when I could invest in myself. And that's what I did. So I'm not an economic engine the way I used to be, but I'm certainly smiling at my desk more than I ever did in my whole long career as a magazine journalist.
Yeah, I mean, loving what you do is like more than half the battle, I think. So, and being happy at doing it every day.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I loved working at Men's Health. Most of my colleagues were amazing, wonderful people. I had a great time there. I got to go to the White House and interview Barack and Michelle Obama for Men's Health. Matt Damon invited me to go to India with him to visit the little villages that his charitywater.org supplies with equipment to bring water to these little villages, which is essential. Like all that stuff was a blast. I liked working in an office, but honestly, I didn't have much choice when that aspect of the publishing industry fell apart. I was laid off at Men's Health. The ghostwriting assignments dried up, and the whole publishing industry was reassessing itself, and I had to reassess myself too to figure out what contribution I would make and what I actually wanted to do. And talking about it now, it all seems like presto changeo. I just waved a magic wand and did that. It wasn't that way at all. There was a lot of new technology I needed to master. There were whole new groups of editors I needed to sway and persuade. I was operating in a completely different mode than I ever had as an editor of these big magazines. But that was part of the fun and the challenge of it too, was like, I haven't done this before. What do I need to learn? What new skills do I need to take on? How can I reinvent myself in this new realm? And, you get to a certain point in your life and everybody needs to change up. They need to seek out some new things, acquire new skills, or otherwise it's just pickleball and golf. And who wants to do that? So I've been very happy over the last 5 years reinventing myself this way.
And you've done a lot of travel. Obviously, you've been to Europe and Africa, and you've done a lot of backpacking. Tell me like some of the best stories that you have from doing these crazy travel stories.
One of the things I used to do to escape from my life at Men's Health, which was very high stress, was I started flying out to Colorado, where I live now, to hike to the 10th Mountain Division huts. And it's a series of huts that were developed by World War II veterans to kind of recreate the camaraderie they felt when they were in training in Colorado in the 10th Mountain Division, which was a World War II fighting unit for the Alps in Europe. And, once I started doing that, it gave me a new focus in my life, a new realm that I was exploring. And, at the same time that I was hiking to 10, 11,000 feet in the Rockies to go to these huts, I was also bringing along my drawing materials. And so I was making a connection between the artwork that I was doing and other sorts of recreation that I had in my life. And, that has proven to be, also transformative in a way. As you say, I'm a devoted hiker, traveler, world traveler, all that. I feel very lucky that I've been able to see so much of the world. But I see the world in a new way with a pencil in my hand and a drawing pad open on my lap, because I was always kind of a bustle and go guy. It was like, I was always hustling from one place to the next. What next adventure was I going to have? And one of the great things about artwork is that it makes you sit down and shut up. You're there looking at an amazing landscape or a little pine cone on the table in front of you, and you really focus all of your efforts on what are the structures that pine cone is made out of. How do the light and shadow play across that? What are the structure of the mountains I'm looking at across the way? And how are the layers of that landscape building from closest to me to the farthest off in the distance? It's all stuff that I hadn't given much thought to. I held up my iPhone and took a snap every now and then, but I didn't really think of the landscapes that I was in. And drawing made me do that and opened up a whole new way of seeing things for me and a whole new way of concentrating on them and appreciating them. So, I feel like I'm just interacting with the world much better because I'm doing it pencil, paper, Apple Pen, iPad, through my artwork.
I have a quote that I got from you, and I wanted to ask you how you learned this. So we all need to listen to ourselves more and the crabby world less. How did you learn to do that for yourself? Because I think I would love to do that for myself.
Yeah, it's these, I don't know how you're experiencing it, but I'm finding these to be very troubling times to be living through. And there's so much noise and anger and feels to me out and out cruelty that's going on in the world right now. And honestly, none of us can afford to tune that out. On the other hand, none of us can afford to be mainlining that to turn our lives into one giant doom scroll. So, one of the ways you can do that is, there are all these forces massed outside of us to conspire against us, to steal our joy from us. And that's the time when we really need to look within and say, okay, what does bring me joy? What can I invest in myself that no matter what's going on in the big world around me, that I can enjoy and take pleasure in for myself, and to make sure that those are among my priorities. So artwork for me was always, that thing that I did on the side that I really loved, but I didn't really commit to it. When the world, essentially, when my professional world turned its back on me, then I had to look for what those things inside me were that were going to give me pleasure and were going to motivate me, that were going to fill my hours in a really positive way. And another thing I've often recommended to people is that, we're also busy all the time, and unless you're able to manufacture or find a zone of silence in your life where nothing is going on, where the screen is blank. And, that's what the publishing world did to me. They turned my screen blank. Then you really have to ask yourself, how do I want to fill that screen now? How do I want to fill my time now? And really, one of the only ways you can do that is if you sweep aside all distractions, and not by choice. All my distractions were swept away. All of my, I'm an editor at Men's Health, that justifies my life. I realize now that it was a positive for me and gave me a lot of great things, but it wasn't essential to me. I was basically offering up my labor to a very big magazine to make the magazine more successful, not make myself more successful. And it all depends on how you define success and what kind of success you need in your life at that time. But I was turned back within my own resources, and I pulled some stuff out of there that I didn't even know I could do. which was, honestly exhilarating for me.
What would you tell someone who's afraid to kind of start over the way that you did? Or somebody that says, oh, it's too late, I can't do this?
Yeah, well, one of my heroes is James Thurber, who's obviously the famous editor, writer, cartoonist for the New Yorker. And, it took him until late on his life. It was late in his 40s. I remember it was a great story. One of his fellow editors at the New Yorker happened to go into his office. Thurber wasn't there. And he glanced down into the trash can and saw a bunch of doodles that Thurber had done and pulled them out. And he said, these are as good as anything we run in the magazine. So he hunted down Thurber and said, what's with these drawings? Did you do these? And James Thurber was initially dismissive of it and soon became one of the all-time most famous, funniest cartoonists in the world. So if James Thurber can reinvent, if Peter Moore, even at a much lower level than James Thurber, can reinvent, I say everyone can reinvent. And, it doesn't mean that I'm not telling anybody to go out and quit their job right now. But what I am saying is that if you listen to the voice within you that's urging you to, take a course in becoming a pastry chef, or take a course like I did, so that you can learn how to draw first, then watercolor, then work with acrylic paints, then finally migrate to digital art on the iPad. These steps in the progression, they don't mean that you need to bankrupt your family or sleep under a bridge for your art. I'm not recommending that to anyone. What I'm saying is that if it's a small voice in your head urging you to go in some direction, find a few footsteps that you can take in that direction and see where that gets you. Maybe it gets you to a few more footsteps, or in my case, it got me to several giant leaps that I took based on really focusing on what I wanted to do. But the whole lead up to that was 10 years of taking art courses and never having any idea that I would become a professional illustrator, artist, commentator. But, until you take those few footsteps, you don't know that you can take the leaps. And that's why I'm a big fan of incremental, see if it gathers momentum, and then see where it takes you.
And we'll be right back. Okay, and now back to the show. And what do you kind of think about, when you're working at the magazines, obviously subscriptions, a number of people that are buying and ads and all that was kind of how you measure success. How do you kind of do that with your job today?
One of the beautiful things about producing like I do on Substack. So when I started out on Substack, for listeners who don't know it, it's a very popular blogging platform right now. And there are a lot of famous writers who are leaping in there and writing for Substack. So one of the great things about it is it's a terrific platform for putting your blog out there and communing with other bloggers who are on the same platform, collaborating with them. So, I probably started my Substack in 2022 or so. I was just limping along there with a couple hundred subscribers there for quite a long time while I was figuring out what my voice was, what my mission was there. When it became clearer to me what I could bring to people and what people were responding to, that's when my subscriptions took off. And, it might not sound like a big number, but I've got 13,000 subscribers on Substack right now.
I think that's a good number.
Yeah, well, I think so too. And so I publish twice a week, and the response I get for it is, so Men's Health, when I was there, I think the subscribers plus newsstand was about 1.2 million. And I wrote some major pieces for them. I wrote about interviewing Barack Obama. There was some high profile work that I did there that, aside from soreheads who, hated Barack Obama, I didn't hear that much from people. But, twice a week on Substack, I get 3,000 people who are responding to my work overnight. And that relationship that I now have with those people who have elected to subscribe to what I do, plus the cross chat that goes on between me and other Substackers who publish similar stuff, it feels like I entered into a whole creative community that I didn't even know anything about in 2022. And now it's giving me major chops as a reaction to my work, attention to my work, sharing my work with others, recommending it. So I feel like, instead of me just, being part of a monolithic institution like Men's Health or Backpack or Playboy, I'm my own institution now. And it feels very personal to me. And that's a very good feeling to feel like you're developing a community around you and people who appreciate your work and thank you for it. So, there aren't the monetary benefits that I had from my book and magazine career, but the psychological benefits are right through the roof. So I'm going to hang with that and hope that the money catches up with it.
I think you should. I mean, I agree. I think, I don't know, I'm at the point in my life where I'm, I can totally understand where you're coming from, where it's great to make all this money and stuff, but being happy also plays a big role in it as well. So,
yeah, I mean, I was out to lunch with a friend a couple of days ago, and he was talking about making post-economic decisions for your life. And, by that he meant we all have this economic part of our life. We have to pay the rent and buy groceries and go out for a nice meal every now and then. But if you can get yourself into a post-economic frame of mind, which is, let's look at the intangibles of my life and how they stack up against what I could be doing to make a whole big pile of money. And like I said, there was that time in my life where the money was super important to me. Right now, with my kids grown and gone and just my wife and me living in a house in Fort Collins, Colorado, we can make other decisions for how we will fill our lives. And to some people, this may sound like retirement. And in fact, I am not retired and working harder than I ever have. It's just that I'm working at the things I truly love rather than working at 90% being an office drone and 10% hanging around with Matt Damon.
Tell me how it was meeting Matt Damon and doing that adventure with him in India. I mean, that must have been incredible.
It was just one of those special things that happens to you if you happen to have the title of editor of Men's Health magazine, because I got a phone call from his publicist saying, "Hey, Peter, do you want to go to India with Matt in the second week of September? Because he's going to be visiting a bunch of these villages and he'd really like you to write about it for Men's Health." And it's just like, I didn't have to think about that offer for too long. That was amazing. And after arduous travel, Chennai in the south of India, I woke up in the morning, jet lagged as hell, walked into the cafeteria of the hotel where I was staying, and there was Matt Damon with a big smile on his face, welcomed me over to the breakfast table. And Matt is a wonderfully generous storyteller, and he was terrific to welcome me on this trip. And, plus we had all these amazing adventures traveling to little villages in India to see what the transformation is when a village of 1,000 people suddenly has water coming into their village rather than the women of the village, which is always the women who are the water bearers, would be having to walk 2-3 miles to get water for their family. So, it was, I came to understand while I was over there that in India, water is a women's issue, as it is just a human issue too. But, the combination of the surrealness of traveling with Matt Damon wasn't anything I expected to do in my life, but plus getting a window into the society in, very substantial way that environmental concern of where's my next drink of water going to come from was all just a fascinating mix of experiences. And I'm super grateful that I was able to do it.
And how was it? Which one? So if you had to pick between the two stories that you kind of mentioned, one was meeting Barack Obama, which I think would be absolutely amazing, or going to India with Matt Damon, which one would win on if you had to choose one?
Yeah, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
But, they're just completely different experiences. It was, talk about humbling. I was sitting in the park across from the White House, like staring down, that white facade and thinking, Barack Obama is in there. And at some point, somebody's going to blow a whistle and I'm going to be admitted to that amazing house. I mean, it occupies a place in American minds because we've been seeing images of it our whole lives. Plus, the Oval Office. So at one point I was upstairs in the White House chatting up the press, his press people. The phone rings. The guy picks it up, nods his head, puts the phone down and said, "The president will see you now." So I was like, I got up out of my chair and he guided me over to it was probably about a 50-yard long hallway that was lined with busts of the presidents. And at the end of that long hallway, I could see this lanky black man leaning against a desk, talking with one of the White House secretaries. And, it's just like, it was unmistakable. That is Barack Obama, and he's waiting for me. So, the longest walk of my life, I get into the anteroom of the Oval Office, and the president stands up and shakes my hand and says, "Nice to see you again, Peter," which meant that his press person cued him in to the fact that I had, in fact, interviewed him before on the campaign trail before he was elected president.
Mm-hmm.
So just, to have him acknowledge that this is our second meeting, and then for him to walk over to the door of the Oval Office and gesture for me to go in before him. I mean, it is truly mind-blowing to be in that room that I'd seen, 100 times on the West Wing, or felt like I'd seen it. And but to be having the actual president show me at the actual Oval Office and seat me in the chair where Trump has been yelling at various ambassadors and country leaders. I was sitting in one of those chairs, and then Barack Obama sat down next to me. So, it was surreal to go through that. I had about 20 minutes with him in the Oval Office. And so, it was like one of those things that you wish that you could hit slow-mo and just maybe experience and appreciate it more. Because, I interviewed him. I had my list of questions that were germane because it was right when Obamacare was just going through Congress.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of issues in there for men. Obviously, men have health challenges, and I wanted to quiz the president on that. But, after 20 minutes of that back and forth, I was kind of expelled back out onto Pennsylvania Avenue and thinking, did that really just happen? So that was, it was like that was mind-blowing in its way, as it is, getting down and dirty with Matt, traveling in a Jeep through the back roads of India. Very different experiences, both terrific, thoughtful, funny guys. I mean, they're perfect subjects if you're a journalist. And I was just lucky that I got to write about both of them for Men's Health.
Peter, I have a question just about Substack. So I feel like it's the new hip way for people to get there. And you did talk about how it is. And I feel like more and more people are moving over to Substack. Even so, I mean, this is going to sound kind of crazy, but there's a guy that's on TikTok and Instagram named Aaron Parnas, and you may know who he is. He kind of does like a couple of news headlines a day, and it's always about kind of what's happening in the political world. And he's not a fan of our current president, but he is, because of TikTok was possibly going to be shut down, or it still could be, I guess. He moved over to Substack. And so that's how I first kind of learned about Substack. So do you think this is a platform that's here to stay?
There are a lot of different media that have their moment.
Yeah.
And we lived in a Twitter world, and then it became X, and who knows what happened to it.
Yeah.
Facebook was co-opted by, it went from young people to retirees, and its light dimmed a bit.
Mm-hmm.
There's some controversy on Substack now, honestly, because, originally it was pitched as a writer's site. And then, some big deal people like Bill Maher and Garrison Keillor, Dave Barry jumped in there and, instantly had followerships of, 1 million people.
Mm-hmm.
So, it could be that what was special about Substack might be eclipsed a bit by the celebrity quotient there. I don't know. But I am grateful that I got my launch there when it was still relatively unknown. I'd never heard of Substack before I made my first post there. So there's room for people like me who are not Bill Maher, but are looking to attract an audience. And, as I gained momentum there, I felt like I'm probably never going to be a celebrity. But if I can deliver what my subscribers are looking for, they're going to recommend me to people. And I won't get to 1 million subscribers, but, maybe I'll get to 20 or 30,000 subscribers. And that'll be a big deal for me, and a lot of the other things I want to do. So I'm going to keep at it. And I'm keeping at it mostly because I love what I'm doing. And, that's kind of what you have to look for on Substack. It's not a place where you can go and just like type in your random thoughts. Your Substack has to be about something. Just like any of the publications or books that I worked on, you need to be, have a very specific mission and have a very specific audience in mind to attract that audience and give them what they're after. So it's not like you can just go in there brain dead and pick up 1 million subscribers. On the other hand, if you have a very strict, very specific vision for something and other people share your enthusiasm for whatever it is you're producing, then Substack can be a great medium. It's a great place to learn. Like I said, I was limping along with 200 subscribers there for a couple of years, but at the same time, I was learning what was special about Substack, where I would find my readers, who my readers were. So I don't regret, I was like off Broadway there for a long time until I kind of moved more to the center of what Substack does.
I think you've had a very interesting life. I think it's very inspiring too, because I think a lot of people, even though you were kind of pushed in that direction, but I also think that you're an inspiration to a lot of people that are wanting to do what they want to do or thinking about, I wish I could do this, and you actually did it. So I think that's pretty amazing that you were able to do that.
Yeah, well, I was pushed, but then I made a leap. So that's the question. Are you going to push and fall down? Are you going to be pushed and fall down? Or are you going to be pushed and then exert yourself to jump that chasm of what's next and get to the next place, which has been such a thrill for me. And I'm still trying to figure out what the next place is, but at least I'm further on down the road.
That's great. Well, everybody go to petermoore.substack.com. Peter's also got a couple of websites. I will put all his websites and a link to his Twitter and YouTube and Instagram. Just so you know, Instagram is at road to elsewhere, the number 2. And I will put all these links into the description of this podcast, and you can go and visit him and send him a DM and subscribe to a Substack and let us know what you think in the comments of the show. Thank you so much. It was really great talking with you. Again, I think you're a great inspiration, and I think hopefully people will take the lead that you've taken and do something similar, do something that they actually want to do.
Well, thank you, Zach, and thank you to all your followers here. I hope they can get something out of my story.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. Be sure to leave a comment and subscribe if you haven't. And again, petermoore.substack.com. Thanks, everybody.